I'd like to take a few minutes tonight to talk about loving. It turns out that in this moment, on this particular day, there are a lot of very pertinent ways to think about and talk about loving. Let's begin with a piece of important history. June 12th is officially Loving Day in a number of United States states. The day is named for the monumental case, Loving versus Virginia, and the interracial couple at its center, Richard and Mildred Loving. The 1967 Supreme Court decision struck down 16 state bans on interracial marriage as unconstitutional. Fast forward to 2015, 1 in 6 newlyweds had a spouse of a different race or ethnicity, which is more than 5 times higher than the number of intermarried newlyweds in 1967, according to Pew Research Center analysis of the United States Census Bureau data. So much has changed, and yet also so much hasn't. Half a century later, the toxic residue of Jim Crow across the centuries continues to make its way down the streets and into people's lives. Those of you in our congregation who are married to someone of a different ethnic background with a different color of skin to you have directly lived the blessing of coming of age and falling in love after the Loving versus Virginia case. You can attest, perhaps, to some of the looks that you may have received, the strange questions you sometimes get, and the assumptions made about the relationship between you and your kids by strangers on the street. And I know it's not every day, it's not all the time, but I know that these experiences haven't disappeared. I know because I'm the grandparent of mixed race grandchildren. I know because I've been out to dinner with my wife, my adult stepchildren, their other stepmom, my son-in-law whose family background is Filipino, and my daughter-in-law whose mother is Korean and whose father was African American, and the waitress in a cool hipster restaurant in Brooklyn finally couldn't hold back any longer as we were paying the check, as she asked, how are you all related? She just couldn't figure it out. It wasn't aggressive and it wasn't negative. But if you're hearing words like white supremacy or implicit bias more these days, and you've not really taken the time to read or study about these things, you might be wondering, well, what's so wrong with the way things are? We've been socially conditioned to put people in different categories and boxes because of their skin color and ethnic features. We haven't yet learned to assume that what appears to be a family is a family, even if they look different to yours. And unfortunately, too many people still believe that they get to judge what is and is not acceptable. Let's talk about another kind of loving, because this is also Pride Month. Before marriage equality for gays and lesbians was recognized federally across all 50 states in 2015, a mere 5 years ago, I used to wonder why the heterosexual majority got to decide if I deserved marriage. Heteronormative assumptions about society implicitly and through law, explicitly and structurally, meant that society was heterosexual, and those of us who were not that were outside of the norm, and we needed to fight for decades, to argue, to protest, to march, and to educate, to reach a point when society decided to bestow these equal rights upon us, or at least the Supreme Court did. And we're not there yet. People who are transgender don't have equal rights in all 50 states. They can lose their jobs because of their gender, nothing to do with their job performance. They are at much higher risk of experiencing physical violence perpetuated against them because of their gender. The current administration has been working to undermine the ability of same-sex couples to have the same opportunities to adopt children in need of forever families, the same rights that heterosexual couples have. And I could go on. for no legitimate reason save for who they love and have built a home with, or because their gender identity is different. I understand some of these issues better because they're part of my own lived experience. And perhaps you understand them because you know me, or you've had direct experiences like these, or you've reached a place where you understand and embrace this kind of diversity. Why do transgender people need our permission to live openly and go to work and go to restaurants and stores and feel safe? What is it about some of these groups that society determines where they belong, or if they belong, or whether they have the same rights, freedoms, and opportunities as you or I? And if you believe that once the inequality has been explained and challenged, that it should be addressed, the next question should be, is this just an idea of what nice looks like to you? Or have you actively engaged in the advocacy and the educational work required to help make those changes a reality? Because when it comes to LGBTQ issues, that's the difference between being not homophobic and being actively pro-LGBTQ equality. When we listen to African Americans now, it's the same question. Why is it that they have to wait for society, which is unspoken code, but assumed to be a white majority that holds power, to grant them equality? There was a time when I was traveling on vacation, when I would always choose bed and breakfasts from a site called Purple Roofs. This site listed LGBTQ friendly places to stay, or places that were gay or lesbian owned. I did not want to stay somewhere where Suri and I would feel that eyes might be upon us and we would be uncomfortable or possibly feel unsafe if we traveled to parts of the country that I was less familiar with. This is an experience that African Americans have on a regular basis, not just where they might travel if they get to take a vacation, but how they pass from one neighborhood to another and other spaces in the course of their everyday lives. It's how and why a young man who's just taking a jog through a neighborhood can end up being shot to death. And this is just a modern version of how it was in decades past, when a Black man who might, in passing on the street, glance at a white woman or say something, would end up being lynched. And this is why you'll hear people saying that the recent killings of Black men, whether it's by law enforcement or by civilians, they regard as a contemporary version of lynching. The underlying assumptions of the one who is looking at the Black man as being out of place is essentially still the same, both, whether we're comfortable with this or not. It's true, both are racist. And the difference between being not racist and actively being anti-racist is whether or not we see it as our responsibility to bring about the structural changes that would make true equality, opportunity, and safety a reality in the lives of those who are telling us that this is not the case now. And that's what all this is about. It's not about politics. It's definitely not left versus right. It's about love. As I began, today is Loving Day. And in Jewish tradition, one of our great sages represents the Torah teaching to love our neighbor as yourself, love your neighbor as yourself. Rather, Hillel teaches it this way: what is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow. And if you're wondering what your role is in all of this and what, if anything, you should be doing, we can start there. I'd like to share a very, very brief video with you. It's a few seconds from anti-racism educator and real trailblazer, Jane Elliott.
I want every white person in this room who would be happy to be treated as this society in general treats our citizens, our black citizens. If you, as a white person, would be happy to receive the same treatment that our black citizens do in this society, please stand. You didn't understand the directions. If you white folks want to be treated the way blacks are in this society, stand. Nobody's standing here. That says very plainly that you know what's happening. You know you don't want it for you. I want to know why you're so willing to accept it or to allow it to happen for others.
Sharon, could you just nod your head if that came through? Thank you. Learning to use my new technology. Let's listen to her words. Asking us, is this how you would want to be treated? And if your answer is no, then let's do some learning and some listening and figure out how we might be able to help bring about change.